You ever come home and find a stranger sleeping in your kitchen? I did. I stepped off a jet, my bones heavy and my head full of airports. And when I pulled up to the mailbox, there was a minivan in my spot, a kid on the porch with a skateboard, and a paper, "Welcome Home," banner where my father's initials used to be carved. That first 3 steps toward the house felt like walking into somebody else's life. I thought maybe I was late for a joke. I wasn't. I'm Eli Mercer. That house, the one with the sagging porch and the oak with the tire swing, was my family's for 3 generations. My granddad signed the papers with a pencil he carried in the pocket of his overalls. We kept the tire swing even after the kids grew up. Somebody sold it while I was overseas. The people who did it weren't crooks in a movie. They wore pearl necklaces and said community a lot. They were the board that managed the neighborhood, and they'd learned how to make paperwork act like law. The hook is simple and ugly. You arrive, and everything you built is gone. The call started then to the county, to anyone who'd listen, and I learned how a ledger can look like law. Margot Hale ran the association, smiled like a neighbor, and filed signatures that would make a notary blush. Administrative error, she called it, and smiled so well I wanted to throw the brass nameplate off her desk. But throwing the nameplate wouldn't put the house back. So we did what stubborn people do. We gathered. Act 2 is where the work lives. You find allies in small places. Rosa Martinez, who'd made quilts for 3 generations and found an eviction notice under her doormat. The Thompsons, whose mailbox had kept a secret notice for months. Luis Ortega, a deputy who'd known my family since high school. We met in kitchens and church basements, over bad coffee and a lot of borrowed chairs. We swapped paperwork like survivors passing maps. That's when a maintenance guy named Curtis slid an envelope across my table and everything changed. Margot answered questions with phrases meant to sound reasonable: governance, policy enforcement, due process, and she used the language to put a velvet glove over something sharper. Claire Bennett, a retired JAG with a stare like legal lightning, said 2 words that changed the pitch of everything. Let's subpoena. We learned how to make the abstract, very physical bank records, timestamps, voicemail dumps. The HOA fought back with notices and threats, with warnings about fines that would compound like interest until people felt too small to argue. She framed it as community safety and procedure, and some neighbors, tired and confused, listened. There's a scene that will stick with me. I walk into the HOA office, the wooden floor creaks, and Margot looks up like a woman who owns the conversation. "Mr. Mercer," she says, "we followed procedure." I show her a photocopy of my signature, and she smiles that practice smile. "Procedural irregularities," she corrects, and says it like a lullaby. Then a maintenance guy coughs from the hall and drops an envelope on the table, a stack of emails, invoices, and a scanned signature that looked like mine but wasn't. The slope of the letters, the pressure points, you could tell by the way ink betrayed the hand. Threats happen in the margins: a truck that idled late at night, a man who walked the property line, the kind of presence meant to be a punctuation mark. Leave. When someone says, "This would be easier if you left," your mind fills in the rest. You call the cops and file reports, you sleep with one ear listening, and you call your lawyer because fighters sometimes need paperwork. The legal war was less Hollywood and more patient math. Claire taught me how to look small on paper and big in court. We filed motions, demanded audits, and served subpoenas like paper shovels turning over earth. The forensic paper trail was messy but decisive: forged signatures, emails scheduling phantom votes, transfers routed through a company with a name that matched Margot's ex-husband. Curtis's envelope had a voicemail: "Clear it by Friday." A voice frantic enough to make someone in a courtroom listen twice. The courtroom is a pressure cooker. The cameras make everyone smaller, and the judge's voice is the only thermostat. There was cross-examination that felt like tweezers pulling at a lie. And there's a moment, always the moment, when a calm face cracks. Margot's voice, which had been polished, turned thin when an email chain with timestamps showed her coordinating clearing titles with a local realtor. The prosecution laid the ledger out: numbers that were stories, stories that were theft. Witnesses spoke in ordinary tones about ordinary life. The quilt maker, the couple who'd celebrated anniversaries on that porch, neighbors who noticed the pattern of late fees and unexplained charges. When the verdict came, it wasn't fireworks. It was a long breath. Titles were voided, some sales reversed. People looked at their hands like they'd been handed back something they'd thought lost. Margot was escorted out not dramatically, but thoroughly, her pearls making a tiny metallic whisper as she stood. Some of us cried. Some of us sat very still, adrenaline spent. The legal wind did not stitch every torn bill or wipe out collections calls, but the judgment was a hinge. It opened doors back into people's lives. There was one exchange that still stings. In the HOA office, I said, "You sold my house." She said, "You abandoned it." Procedure. I said, "My name's on the mortgage." Her practiced smile cracked for a second, and that was all the proof I needed that someone had been abusing the script they wrote for themselves. Afterward, life slowly knit itself back together. Kids came home, neighbors fixed the fence, and we learned to watch paperwork like it mattered. The last work is quieter. Repainting porches, replacing a rope on the tire swing, sorting credit calls into piles, and dealing with the small, bitter business of cleaning up what crooked paper did. We formed a new oversight committee, not to replace a governing body, but to insist on transparency. Meetings were recorded, votes were posted, ledgers were public. We taught each other to read deeds and how to ask for receipts. There were classes at the county clerk's office and neighbors teaching neighbors how to protect what they owned. Of course, nothing became simple. Margot had defenders who said we overreached, who accused us of turning a local issue into a spectacle. The line between civic action and vigilantism is thin, and people will always argue where the edge lies. I don't pretend we were perfect. We were human, messy, and sometimes loud, but we were right to push when right was being bent. What I keep thinking about is how fragile the things we love can be when power learns to hide in plain forms, in a notice, in a meeting, in a phrase like administrative oversight. It feels like a strange civic lesson. Paperwork can be a weapon, but the flip side is true too. Paper can be a talisman. Records, receipts, a saved email, a witness who remembers those ordinary things were what brought us back together. So here's the thing I want you to take away. Don't normalize a polite shrug when something about your property or community feels off. Ask questions. Keep records. Talk to your neighbors. And when something smells wrong, don't assume it's just bureaucracy doing its job. Now tell me, have you seen something like this in your town? Do you think we did the right thing, or did we cross a line? Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you've got a neighbor story that'll make me wince, share it. Hit like if you believe in keeping what your family built. And share this with someone who needs to know their rights, because sometimes the difference between keeping your home and losing it is knowing what to look for.